day began like any other for Cheryl and Paul Chapman until the silence of a peaceful Sunday morning was shattered with a phone call. Cheryl's sister Nancy had not shown up for work, and several attempts to reach her by phone were unsuccessful. The Chapmans, sensing something must be wrong,
Nancy?
rushed to her apartment.
Some killers are stealthy, killing with an almost clinical precision. Others act on a violent impulse, saturating the crime scene with their rage. How a murderer behaves tells much about who he is. In 1987, the brutality of a triple homicide in Anchorage tested the mettle of even the most seasoned investigators. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. When Nancy Newman and her 2 young daughters were found slain in their apartment, local law enforcement needed help. They called the FBI. At the crime scene, clues were everywhere, but seemed to lead nowhere. Agents knew that to crack this case, they need to somehow get inside the killer's mind.
Alaska sits on the edge of the wilderness, seemingly isolated from the rest of the world and its troubles. Its inhabitants are united by the beauty of the landscape and a mutual respect for the self-reliant nature of the community.
On the rocky coast of northern France, where the Atlantic Ocean crashes ashore, the villagers of Karnak wake up each day to a little.
It was shortly before 8 a.m. on a Sunday, March 15th, 1987. Cheryl and Paul Chapman were awakened by a phone call. Cheryl's sister, Nancy Newman, was hours late for the breakfast shift at the restaurant where she worked. Nancy's shift manager told Cheryl that Nancy's car was in the restaurant parking lot, but Nancy was nowhere in sight. Maybe the Chapmans should check on her. From the moment Paul and Cheryl arrived at Nancy's apartment, they sensed something was wrong. There was no sign of Nancy. Her 2 daughters, 8-year-old Melissa and 3-year-old Angie, were nowhere in sight. Coffee mugs from Cheryl's Friday night visit with her sister were still in the sink. The remains of breakfast had been left on the table. The tin where Nancy kept her tip money sat empty. And a brown cigarette butt, not a brand Nancy smoked, was in the ashtray.
Nancy? Nancy?
In Nancy's bedroom, Paul made a gruesome discovery. He found Nancy lying beaten and lifeless on her bed. Paul rushed to the other bedrooms to find Nancy's 2 girls. To his horror, he found Melissa and Angie brutally murdered.
Emergency.
Yeah, trying to get the police, please.
What's the problem there?
It's been a homicide.
Return a homicide?
Our sister-in-law didn't show up from work. They called us at our house, but no one seen her. We came over to find her.
We're at
4310.
40.
And it's terrible.
Just send somebody as soon as you can.
We've got some on hold right now.
Contact 2 Intermit.
Within minutes, the first Anchorage police officers arrived at the Newman's apartment. Not wanting to disturb the crime scene, the officers secured the area and tried to calm the distraught family until the crime scene processing unit arrived. What police found was horrific. Nancy and Melissa Newman appeared to have been beaten and strangled. Little Angie Newman's throat was cut so deeply she was almost decapitated.
Nice. Rigger?
Not yet.
Is it set?
Anchorage police officer Bill Gifford was at the scene.
Well, the impact of a case like this is quite often it's hard to capture in words. We're pretty used to working homicide cases and serious assault cases, and overall I think a community becomes, if not callous, somewhat accustomed to these kind of things happening, just a typical murder. Something of this magnitude, however, people are never prepared for.
The murders were so gruesome that even experienced police officers were shaken.
It is shocking for the public, and it takes a toll on the investigators and the officers working the case as well, because you're just not used to seeing, as I mentioned, things of this magnitude.
Nancy Newman's body was lying on her bed, her nightgown hiked up around her chest. There were abrasions on her nose, chin, and forehead, and a knee seemed to be injured. Bloodstains were at the foot of the bed. A pair of olive green gloves were on top of the dresser.
Good idea with cover. Yeah, do a scrape so you can get some.
Down the hall, Melissa Newman was found on her back in the middle of her room. A bloody, twisted pillowcase under her neck. Another pillowcase had been used to tie her arms. Three-year-old Angie Newman lay on her bedroom floor in a pool of blood, surrounded by her favorite books.
Couple shots of the face. There's the bed where all the blood is. Everybody's ready? Here it is.
Bloodstain pattern analysis often yields clues. The positions of the victims and killer. The movements of the victims. And the number of blows struck can be reconstructed by an experienced examiner.
In this particular case, it assisted us in establishing a sequence of events.
Stains found on Nancy Newman's bed suggested that she and Melissa had been forced down the hall to her mother's room, where they were assaulted. And stains on the hallway carpeting indicated that Melissa was then returned to her room and killed there. Officers treated each area as a completely separate crime scene. First, they determined the type of physical evidence that was likely to be found, and then the order it should be processed.
How are we doing?
Given the horrific nature of this crime and the lack of an obvious suspect, investigators knew that every possible piece of physical evidence was potentially invaluable.
Here, all these plates. Anything else was covered all yet? Super. Great.
Detective Sergeant Michael Grimes was in charge of the Anchorage Police Department's Homicide, Assault, and Robbery Unit.
I knew that they were going to be in this crime scene for hours and hours and hours. This immediately is what we identify as a forensic case. There was very little disturbed by them when they found the bodies, so we were very fortunate in that respect.
Investigators frequently find evidence in common household dirt. Sometimes hair and fibers buried in carpeting can be traced to a suspect. For thorough coverage, investigators broke each room into quadrants and vacuumed each section. To begin the painstaking task, investigators must first cordon off a 3-foot by 4-foot area of the room. The investigator uses an ordinary vacuum with a special filter attachment. As the debris is pulled off the floor, it travels down a short tube and then goes into a collection point. There it becomes trapped in clean filter paper. Once a quadrant of the room has been processed, the filter is removed and placed into an evidence container. Many minute hairs and fibers are missed by crime scene vacuumings. Therefore, a portable argon laser is used, which causes unseen hairs and fibers to fluoresce when exposed to the laser's light.
Go ahead and package that. Okay.
Let's not lose any of this, okay?
That's for sure. Got it.
A technique called luminol processing was also used to look for traces of blood. If present, the luminol spray will cause the proteins in the blood to fluoresce, making them visible to examiners.
We were processing the scene and looking for invisible traces or invisible blood patterns. We found a luminescent impression that we were able to photograph. We also knew we had a knife missing out of the kitchen. We took one of those knives out of the knife set, and we found that matched in width and length to that of the luminol impression that we had.
Go ahead and check the bathroom.
The crime scene appearance suggested the murderer had taken the victims by surprise.
Check his washcloth before we package it up, okay? Make sure there's nothing inside of it.
It appeared that Newman's morning routine was suddenly interrupted, perhaps indicating that they knew the killer.
Okay, excellent. Good job. Go ahead and mark that everything.
A big question was motive. At the scene, Cheryl told police that Nancy seemed to have no enemies. As a waitress, she was popular among her customers and colleagues, friendly without being flirtatious. And what possible motive could explain the rage inflicted upon 8-year-old Melissa and 3-year-old Angie?
Did you have a good time tonight?
Burglary was unlikely. It was obvious to investigators that the apartment had not been ransacked or otherwise disturbed. Investigators struggled to find a solid lead. Detective Bill Reeder worked the case from the beginning.
The initial lead came from the scene itself, that we could find no signs of forced entry. So that kind of leaned us toward looking at people that had access to the apartment or knew the victims.
Immediately the questioning began. Neighbors, family and friends, anyone who may have had information.
What we were looking at was to find someone that had seen anything unusual, any strangers in the area, had heard anything unusual, had seen someone carrying things away, anything at all that would help us focus on someone or somebody.
Family members are almost always suspects early in an investigation. Paul Chapman was no exception. Though he had no one to back up his alibi, which was that he was alone most of Saturday, his reaction to discovering the bodies was clearly one of trauma and loss. Investigators spoke with everyone close to the family and learned that Nancy Newman was happily married to John Newman, the father of their 2 girls. He was a suspect, spouses usually are. But John Newman was in California training to be a locksmith at the time of the murders.
Another way to eliminate a suspect is to watch and continue to talk to him. John never gave us any indication other than he wanted this case solved. He was extremely distraught, gave all the signs that anybody would give under the circumstances.
Because the Newmans lived in a multi-unit apartment complex, Detective Grimes knew that interviewing neighbors in the immediate area would be a daunting task.
It was an apartment in a multi-unit apartment house, which was in a particular area of town that was surrounded by large multi-unit apartment houses, and we were looking at literally hundreds of dwellings in that area.
The close-knit community of Anchorage was shocked by the brutality of the murders. Police investigators, having no experience with crimes this shocking, were asking the most frightening of all possible questions. Was a serial killer a possibility? Police felt pressured to work quickly.
What kind of person would do this kind of crime? Was there significance in the way the people were murdered that could give us some kind of leads as to who we were looking for, or at least what type of person? And so immediately, I'd say within the first day or so, we were getting some help from the FBI.
Investigators quickly realized they needed help in determining the type of individual responsible for the murders. They turned to the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico, Virginia. Special Agent Judd Ray received the call. As a profiler in the unit, Ray's job was to assist investigators in hunting down America's worst killers. To do that, Ray had to understand the workings of a killer's mind.
We were looking at deeds and acts of individuals after it happened and trying to predict the kind of personality, if you will, a composite view of what kind of human being could have done it.
Through detailed evaluations of crime scene photos and police reports, Ray provided investigators with a psychological portrait of the killer.
This is a disorganized crime scene. I mean, you know, low self-esteem, all the kinds of things that you would say about this kind of person. You know, that society has rejected him through the years, and now it's his time to reject society.
Ray told the Anchorage detectives that they possibly faced a repeat performance.
This particular incident alarmed him so much, particularly with 3 victims at one time, 2 being children, that his opinion also, he said that we need to get something working on this right away, because it appears that this person's out of control, and there is the potential that he's going to be doing it again in the very near future.
From the autopsy reports, investigators learned that Nancy and 8-year-old Melissa Newman had been sexually assaulted. Based on this information and characteristics of the crime, Ray concluded that this violent offender would have a history of sexual assault. He would be a white male in his early to mid-20s, an underachiever. Following Ray's conclusions, investigators began to narrow the range of possible suspects. Among them was a young man who had recently moved in a few doors down from the Newmans. Police also questioned Kirby Anthony, the 23-year-old nephew of John Newman. Anthony had an alibi into the morning hours of Saturday, March 14th, but the neighbor did not.
The tremendous rage that was inflicted on the almost decapitated the young 3-year-old suggested that that there's nothing in my mind that I had came across that would have been sufficient on its face to justify this kind of rage by a stranger.
Ray's insistence that the killer was known to the victims led investigators to shift focus away from the man who lived nearby. Neighbors and friends of the Newmans confirmed the young man's claim that he had never met Nancy Newman or her children.
Because I had talked about familiarity, somebody that's close to the family, somebody that knows her, that had some sort of relationship with her, perhaps even been rejected by her. They said, well, as a matter of fact, there's a nephew that comes to mind.
As investigators continued questioning possible suspects, the volume of evidence that had been collected from the crime scene was taxing the limits of Alaska's state crime lab. Once again, Anchorage police turned to the FBI. The evidence was sent to the FBI's crime lab in Washington, D.C. Hair and fiber expert Doug Diedrich was given the case. Diedrich began by sorting through the evidence, searching for any link to a suspect. Hairs, fibers, glass particles, soil, paint chips, anything that may have been transferred during the killer's violent contact with his victims.
Altogether, I believe I looked at over 300, close to 400 items of evidence from the crime scene, from the victims, from elimination samples from different people, both suspect and relatives and possible acquaintances.
Fibers are unusually difficult to trace, and because no one knew what the killer was wearing during the murders, there was no basis in which to compare recovered fibers.
The varieties that are out there are endless, so that when an individual in a case, for instance, who is wearing a particular type of clothing transfers fiber material, that evidence will be considered to be unique. Even though they may have made a number of garments of the same type, by the time it gets out into the public, this material is dispersed like a drop of oil in the ocean. It's there, but it's hard to find.
Distinct fibers, amounting to less than a thimbleful of evidence, were recovered from throughout the Newman's apartment. Diedrich's expertise of fiber transfer, however, enabled him to reconstruct the suspect's movements during the crime, giving investigators a clearer picture of what actually transpired in the apartment. As Diedrich's analysis progressed, Anchorage police asked Kirby Anthony to come to the police department to give more detailed statements. They began to learn more of his story.
And Rose?
Anthony and his girlfriend had moved from Twin Falls, Idaho to Anchorage 18 months earlier. Both had stayed at the Newmans for a while, but were asked to leave about the time they found jobs on a fishing boat.
And I'm grateful, but we're not married.
He and his girlfriend split up while working on the boat after Kirby accused her of having an affair with the skipper. His mates described him as irrational and unstable after the breakup. He clashed with the skipper and was fired. He returned to Anchorage alone on February 14th, 1987. Having nowhere else to go, Anthony took a taxi from the airport straight to the Newmans. Through Cheryl Chapman's continued assistance, police learned that John Newman was upset over his nephew's return to the Newman household during his absence. At the same time, the situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable for Nancy. After a few weeks, she asked Anthony to leave. He moved in with an acquaintance, Dan Grant. As the investigation began to focus on Kirby Anthony, Sergeant Grimes recalled his first encounter with him. The day of the murders, Detective Grimes took on the task of notifying Anthony about the deaths.
I told him that we had some bad news for him, that his aunt and her two little girls had been found dead just earlier that morning. As I recall, Kirby grabbed his hair and started wailing and moaning, but it was all dry-eyed. There was no tears.
Either Phil or...
Anthony's demeanor did not fit that of a grieving family member. But Grimes knew that Anthony's odd behavior would never justify an arrest.
Well, I know I was.
The autopsy report, however, made investigators more suspicious. Autopsy results helped pinpoint the murders between 7 a.m. and noon on Saturday, March 14th.
What we're able to demonstrate is that the murders happened early in the morning, after the victims had gotten up in the morning. One of the victims had a bowl of cereal. The other was in the process of eating some cereal. The mother was in the process of having a cup of coffee.
Establishing the time of the deaths made Anthony's alibi irrelevant, which was that he was at an all-night party until early that Saturday morning. He admitted that he drank, smoked some marijuana, and did cocaine.
Hey man, wake up! Get up, man!
He said he returned to the house he shared with Dan Grant at about 7 a.m., then left again at about 8:45 a.m. Meanwhile, FBI agent Diedrich's investigation into fiber and hair evidence was growing more complicated.
One of the items that had come in consisted of vacuum sweepings. At least there were several vacuum sweepings from different rooms. Those items have to be processed and hairs have to be prepared from that. What was, I think, probably the most difficult aspect of this case for me was in trying to account for every hair that was found in that residence. And that's something that's not usually done, and seen as there are often too many hairs to deal with. But in this case, it was a monumental task to do that.
Each hair displays its own peculiar characteristics under a microscope, making it possible to trace its likely origin.
The fact that hairs will differ from person to person is very evident when you magnify these characteristics upwards of 250, 400 times.
To examine the fibers and hairs collected at the scene, Diedrich used two high-powered comparison microscopes connected by an optical bridge, one for known material and the other for material yet to be identified. Because Anthony had lived with the Newmans for a while, his hair was likely to be in the apartment. That meant it was important to establish whether the trace hairs were old or recent. So Diedrich went through the contents of the vacuum used in the Newman household.
Because of the vast quantities of hairs and other items that were found in the bag, I had to look at the vacuum bag from a layer standpoint. That is, what was the most recently deposited or recently vacuumed material.
Since Kirby Anthony had denied being in the Newmans' apartment recently, it was imperative that Diedrich determine the condition of the hairs.
The condition of the surface of hairs, the condition of the ends, the roots, will often indicate how long a hair may have been in a particular environment.
Working his way through the layers of the Newmans' vacuum bag, Diedrich found some of the same types of hairs that did not appear to belong to any of the Newmans. These hairs had been recently deposited. In addition to the vacuum sweepings, unidentified pubic hairs were also found on the victims and inside their bedrooms. To determine the significance of these findings, Diedrich now wanted to know how hairs usually are transferred from one room to another. So he conducted his own experiment.
It was a question as to how likely would it be to find somebody's hairs, say pubic hairs, in different areas of a home. So I designed a little experiment where I took a vacuum home, crime scene vacuum, to my house and vacuumed 4 bedrooms over a 2-week period, same time every day, just to see what types of hairs might be found. I was focusing mainly on pubic hairs.
Diedrich preserved the material from every sweeping. He then compared the hairs from those sweepings with known hairs from himself. Diedrich was able to conclude that the hairs did migrate from room to room, mostly by sticking to socks or other clothing. The hairs deposited at the beginning of the experiment were deeper in the vacuum debris and therefore more damaged. The more recently deposited ones were not. The finding was significant to Diedrich. Since Cheryl told police that Nancy vacuumed her house Friday, the unidentified hairs found on the victims would have been deposited right at the time of the murders. Under microscopic scrutiny, an important piece of evidence was revealed. A pubic hair with a partial egg casing, the kind associated with genital lice, was clinging to the damp washcloth found in the Newman's bathroom. Diedrich told investigators of his findings and waited for a sample from a suspect in order to make a comparison. There were at least a half a dozen individuals who were considered prime suspects. Investigators received lists from the State Corrections Department of people recently released who had a history of sex crimes or violence. Some of them were living in the area close to the Newmans. To eliminate these individuals as suspects, each one was extensively questioned and all of their alibis were checked out. Police continued to question Anthony. He admitted nothing. But with each interview, the details of where he was and what he did the morning of the murders changed slightly.
No, I'm still pretty wired. That was kind of an indicator of what we were going to be dealing with Kirby from the get-go, was these little lies that weren't necessary but were thrown out to us.
Unaware of Diedrich's hair analysis, Anthony was asked by investigators to submit hair and blood samples. Wanting to appear cooperative, he voluntarily submitted the samples. They were rushed to Diedrich for comparison. The next day, Diedrich notified investigators that Anthony had pubic lice.
Well, that was probably the most significant breakthrough. At that point, we could start focusing on Kirby as the suspect.
When confronted with the evidence of the hair and egg casing on the washcloth, Anthony admitted that he did have lice. He said he had showered at the Newmans a week before the murders so as not to spread the pubic lice at Dan Grant's house. For Judd Ray, the dirty washcloth left at the crime scene told much about the suspect. The killer had cleaned himself at the murder scene. Why take the risk? Why not go home?
It was obvious to me that he had to go somewhere where he couldn't go there all bloody, which sort of got into this guy's not a loner living alone somewhere.
Ray's behavioral profile also predicted the killer would have been associated with a previous sexual assault. This prediction prompted investigators to look deeper into Kirby's past. They learned that Kirby Anthony had been the central suspect in an Idaho case that remains open to this day. The victim, a 12-year-old girl, suffered brain damage in the attack and was unable to testify.
He had just previous to coming to Alaska, been the focus of police attention down there. They had some type of outdoor picnic outing, and There was a 12-year-old that was found in the woods. She had been strangled, unconscious, near death, and she had been sexually assaulted. Their investigation pointed right at Kirby Anthony.
Ray also predicted the killer would want to appear cooperative with police.
They told us that the suspect would interject himself into the investigation. He would call to find out what the evidence was showing, and Kirby started doing that.
What investigators did not share with Anthony was that Diedrich's other hair comparisons were also pointing to Anthony. The pubic hair found on the washcloth was only one of many positive associations Diedrich was able to make between hairs found at the crime scene and those submitted by Anthony.
And in this case, a number of pubic hairs that were like Kirby Anthony's were found in the rooms, both the victims' rooms, the two girls, and as well as a couple of them that were similar to his on the bed of the mother.
A hair from Anthony's head also was found on the top sheet of Nancy Newman's bed. Facial hairs that matched Anthony's beard were found on all of the victims and in their rooms. The vacuum sweepings from Melissa's room contained 9 of Anthony's pubic hairs. The sweepings from Angie's room included 2 pubic hairs, one with blood and one with lice casings. Investigators felt it was time to keep tabs on Anthony's movements. Through surveillance, investigators learned of Anthony's hangouts and discreetly followed him around town. They hoped that Anthony would reveal something to his friends that would further implicate him in the murders. If he did, the investigators would soon find out. The effort paid off. One of Anthony's acquaintances told investigators that he was writing poetry on napkins and passing the poems around the table. He told one of the women that Nancy Newman had been forced to watch part of the assault.
It was my aunt, 2 nieces.
Investigators also learned that at one point after the murders, Anthony called his ex-girlfriend's mother in Idaho to tell her about the crime. Angie Newman had been stabbed, he said, and Nancy and Melissa sexually assaulted. In both instances, the call to Idaho and the scene at the bar, Anthony could not yet have known about the details he described.
You must have read a different article.
The information had not been released by police to the press, nor had investigators mentioned it to Anthony during questioning.
Pretty sick. I don't remember those details. You did?
Since the surveillance was not a 24-hour-a-day tactic, they would often drive by his house to see if his vehicle was parked out front. If he was home, investigators would often ask him to answer some questions. The circumstantial evidence against Anthony was mounting. During a visit to his residence, investigators noticed a manually operated camera belonging to John Newman that had been reported missing after the murders. He told detectives that the Newmans lent it to him, but when asked later to demonstrate how it worked, he seemed to have no idea how to operate it. Another item missing from the Newman house seemed to be traceable to Anthony. The tip money missing from the cookie tin consisted only of coins. 3 of Anthony's friends told police they either saw him rolling coins into wrappers or saw him pay for items with wrapped coins. And then there were the prints. Anthony's palm print was found on the wall over the bed where Melissa Newman had been assaulted. Prints found on the empty cookie tin on the kitchen table matched Anthony's. His prints were also found on the living room closet door and the inside and outside of the apartment door.
Another place we located one of Kirby's fingerprints was on the back side of the door to the mother's bedroom. And again, its position was significant in that it led us to believe that perhaps someone was trying to escape out of the room, and he already had some other trace evidence on his hand. He slammed the door shut, transferring not only his fingerprint, but some of the other trace evidence that was found in the scene.
The evidence was overwhelming. Every suspect in the month-long investigation had ultimately been cleared, except Kirby Anthony.
Appreciate that.
Well, when you got home, was there anyone there?
For investigators, it was time to obtain an arrest warrant.
And when you got home?
Judd Ray had previously cautioned investigators that the killer might try to flee if the pressure became too much. The increasing intensity of police questioning had made Anthony nervous. Judd Ray was right again. Anthony confided to his roommate, Dan Grant, that he was leaving town. He asked his friend not to tell police. Grant was afraid to contact Anchorage police because of Anthony's notorious temper.
Second precinct desk.
Nonetheless, he did finally call them 7 hours later.
Okay.
Anthony was heading to the Canadian border, an 8-hour drive away, and he had a 7-hour head start. Anchorage and the Canadian border are separated by hundreds of miles of uninhabited wilderness. Anthony could be hiding anywhere. Anchorage police quickly contacted U.S. Customs at the Alaska-Canada border. They described Anthony and his vehicle and told the custom official that Anthony was a suspect in a triple homicide. They were hoping he was on his way. Less than an hour later, Anthony arrived at U.S. Customs. Having no idea that investigators had been tipped off, Anthony calmly pulled up to the customs gate.
Step out of the car. Could you get out of the car, please?
He was detained and questioned until Alaska state troopers arrived. He was arrested for driving on a suspended license and returned to Anchorage.
Thanks a lot for the hospitality there.
As he was turned over to the Anchorage police, he was read his rights and charged. 3 counts first-degree murder, 2 counts sexual assault, and 1 count kidnapping. Under Alaska law, kidnapping can be charged if a victim is restrained during an assault. Melissa Newman had been tied up during the attack.
He jumps up and screaming, "What is this kidnapping stuff?" Which struck us as odd because here he was charged with 3 counts of murder and 2 counts of sexual assault, and he's screaming about the kidnapping charge.
By this time, the forensic evidence was complete enough that police believed they could reconstruct how Angie, Melissa, and Nancy were brutally murdered. The last time Cheryl Chapman saw her sister alive was Friday, March 13th. Cheryl, Paul, and Nancy had each arrived separately at the restaurant where Nancy worked to meet for drinks. Cheryl's daughter, Kelly, had taken Nancy's girls swimming, so the adults had a night out. Paul Chapman had to leave the restaurant early to pick up his son, but planned to meet them later at Nancy's apartment. As they were leaving, Cheryl suggested that Nancy leave her car at the restaurant and ride home with her. Nancy had Saturday off, and Paul would gladly give her a ride back to her car tomorrow.
I don't know. I never pay attention to. You're in, what, 11:30? Yeah.
What time you come in?
11.
11?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead.
Cheryl, Paul, and Nancy all ended up at the Newmans' apartment to wait for Kelly and the girls.
As if you don't see me every day.
They sat, laughing and talking, until about 9:45 when the girls came home. Kelly had treated them to hamburgers. At about 10 p.m., Cheryl and Paul were ready to leave. Cheryl helped Nancy clear the table and put the used coffee mugs in the sink. Angie was already in her pajamas, and Melissa had gone to her room to get ready for bed.
Just hit him right there. Yeah.
As they said goodnight, Paul told Nancy to call him the next day if she wanted a ride back to her car. Sometime between 7 a.m. and noon on Saturday, March 14th, Kirby Anthony arrived at the Newmans' apartment. Kirby Anthony is the only person who knows what happened next. Perhaps Nancy refused to lend him money. Perhaps she refused a sexual advance. Perhaps she ordered him out of the apartment. In any case, his anger boiled over. Evidence indicated that part of the assault on Melissa occurred in her mother's room. Both would have had to have been restrained, and their bodies did show signs of having been bound.
We are able to show through serological findings that Melissa, the 8-year-old, had been assaulted in the mother's bedroom and that she had crossed the bed and was actively bleeding at the time. And then she is subdued somehow and held in a position in that room for a period of time.
Melissa Newman probably witnessed the rape and murder of her mother. She then was taken back to her bedroom where she was assaulted again and killed. The knife used to kill little Angie was never recovered. It was unclear whether she was killed first or last. What was certain was that she seemed to be the target of a horrible, uncontrolled rage. Nancy Newman did not call Paul Chapman the next day for a ride to her car, nor did she answer the phone when her sister tried to reach her repeatedly. Instead, she and her 2 daughters lay dead nearly a full day before their bodies were discovered. The particular grudge against Angie may have grown out of the few times that Anthony babysat the girls. Reportedly, he had called her a tyrant. But for those close to the victims, and for investigators working the case, nothing could explain Kirby Anthony's savagery.
I don't really think that you could isolate any one thing that would cause a man to fly into the homicidal rage like Kirby Anthony did. Yeah, for the most part, I don't think that Kirby Anthony could even tell you why he would do something like that.
A grieving John Newman sat in stony silence throughout his nephew's trial. After 8 weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict on June 3, 1988. A clean-shaven Anthony seemed confident as he waited for the verdict. As each guilty verdict was read, Anthony's composure disintegrated until finally it shattered completely. He was sentenced to 357 years for his crimes. Kirby Anthony's conviction represented an almost textbook example of cooperative police work. Anchorage police provided the FBI with evidence collected from a meticulously preserved crime scene.
Oh, yeah?
Doug Diedrich carefully analyzed the hairs and fibers and anticipated Kirby Anthony's excuses, conducting his own home experiment to refute them. Judd Ray helped police stay several steps ahead of Anthony's thoughts and actions. And for the first time, testimony of an FBI profiler was accepted in court.
It was a good case to test the waters in terms of whether or not this was going to be accepted in our judicial system. And for that, the implications are probably far-reaching because it opened the door.
Philadelphia, Mississippi, 1964. A sleepy southern town steeped in tradition finds itself targeted for invasion. Across the South, a legacy of racial hatred is about to be challenged, but not without a fight. Before it would end, 3 civil rights workers would vanish, drawing the eyes of the world to the quiet community with a burning secret. Amen!
In the summer of 1964, Mississippi stood at the crossroads of history. It didn't want to be there. It had no choice. For the black population, the sultry air held the fragrant promise of civil rights. For much of the white population, it was to be a summer of heated intolerance. Violence rumbled throughout the South, but it touched down in Philadelphia, Mississippi. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. The disappearance of 3 civil rights workers drew the attention of the nation to this small southern town. Named for the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia was not living up to its namesake. For in it, brotherhood was divided by race, and the city was ruled by men hiding behind hooded sheets. To solve the mystery of the missing workers, the FBI had to infiltrate and expose the Klan's invisible empire.
Mississippi, circa 1960. The people here were like folks anywhere else, proud of their towns, steadfast in their beliefs, and resistant to change. But change was in the wind, and that wind was blowing relentlessly upon them from the north. In the summer of 1964, 1,000 students from northern universities prepared to go to Mississippi to teach Southern blacks about their voting rights as full citizens of this country. President Johnson was to sign the Civil Rights Bill in July. In a naive sense, it was to be the beginning of the end of black oppression. But generations of hatred cannot be diminished by simple legislation. The student action was spearheaded by COFO, the Council of Federated Organizations. It was an umbrella group that united an alphabet soup of organizations intent on winning civil rights for blacks. The mission was called the Summer Project. According to Joe Sullivan, an FBI agent at the time, that's not how the locals referred to it.
It was labeled very quickly by the Mississippians as the summer invasion of Mississippi, which was forthcoming, and they were looking forward to it rather unhappily. So that was the genesis of the problem.
As the invasion grew nearer, citizens steeled themselves against it. By day, life went on as it always had, and people whispered of the unpleasantness to come. But when the night fell, words turned to action, and the Ku Klux Klan, the invisible empire, began to stir. It wouldn't stay invisible for long. Civil rights workers training in Ohio knew their efforts would be countered by violence and terror, but they had no idea how far it would go or how fast it would escalate. For Kofo, Mississippi, with its long history of segregation and rabid racial hatred, was the hardest target for change and the biggest prize. Bob Moses was one of the Summer Project organizers.
Mississippi is targeted in every black person's mind as the symbol of racism. And so as we mount our campaign down there, the question is in our minds, well, you can do all you want. You can pass a civil rights bill if you want to, and you can do this and that, but unless you have actual change in Mississippi, it's not going to really get rid of this infection, because Mississippi is the place where they brew it.
6 months before the students were expected in Mississippi, 24-year-old Michael Schwerner moved from New York to Meridian, Mississippi to establish a base of operations. Schwerner had approached Mount Zion Methodist Church in the nearby black community of Longwood for permission to use their space for COFO meetings.
And we have got to stop it now, nip it in the bud. That's what we've got to do.
But it's dangerous,
The residents of Longwood, who had peacefully coexisted with their white neighbors, found themselves at a crossroads. The church board had to weigh the benefits to the cause of civil rights against concern for their own personal safety. When the meeting was adjourned, they hadn't come to an accord. But the Klan made the decision for them. Several church members, including women, were badly beaten. Later that night, Mount Zion Church was burned to the ground. Though the fire was never investigated by local authorities, the FBI opened a file on the incident.
FBI, ma'am.
They were keeping a record of possible federal law violations which fell under their domain. They knew that once the students arrived, the summer promised to be long and hot.
Just wondering if I could
The FBI called the file Mississippi Burning, or My Burn. They conducted their own investigation, asking church members what they saw that night.
How did they know that? How did you know that?
Though the Klan members had obscured their faces, witnesses recalled seeing a man in a truck wearing a sheriff's hat, suggesting that local law enforcement was involved. It wasn't surprising. Many in the South resented the federal government's intrusive push for integration. Local law enforcement often worked to maintain the racial status quo.
The mood is defiance of the federal government, so you're going to defy any attempt by the federal government to change this. They're viewed as the enemy, right? So it's not just that black people are the enemy, the federal government is also the enemy.
Jim Ingram, now the commissioner of the Mississippi Department of Public Safety, was an FBI agent in Jackson in the 60s. Back then, it was a thankless job.
But we travel the state. We might be in Natchez, we might be in Philadelphia, we might be in Hattiesburg, working violent crimes committed against citizens of Mississippi. Therefore, we were away from our homes, and we would receive threats. Snakes were placed in mailboxes. There was always that threat, you better lock your car. You never knew what you might find in your automobile when you return. And also you had threats against your person and family.
But despite all attempts at intimidation, the FBI's presence in the state was about to increase more than 100-fold. While setting up their COFO Operations Center in Meridian, Mississippi, Michael Schwerner and his wife Rita were joined by a 20-year-old plasterer named James Cheney.
Good to have you aboard. This is my wife, Rita.
Hi. How are you? Good to have you.
Fine.
Cheney, a Meridian native, knew the culture and political climate of the area.
Sit down right here. Okay, dear.
24-year-old Michael Schwerner, a liberal from the Bronx, had an Ivy League degree in social work. His background couldn't have been more different from Cheney's, but the men were united in their goals.
Very good. Use that.
Schwerner's friends called him Mickey, a name he seldom heard outside the office.
Townspeople, and I'm talking now about the Klansmen in Meridian, called him Goatee. He wore a goatee, and they called him the Devil.
Hi, Miss Peter Bob Moses.
Schwerner and Cheney were later joined by Andrew Goodman, 20, a volunteer from Queens, New York, who had finished his training in Ohio just 1 week earlier.
Yeah, Andrew, just put in that box right there. We'll be just leaving in a second.
While Rita Schwerner returned to New York, the 3 men and other volunteer staff prepared for the first group of 200 civil rights workers from up north. The first wave of the invasion, scheduled to arrive on June 21st, 1964. That morning, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman drove from their base in Meridian to Longwood, 35 miles away, to talk to the Mount Zion church members about the fire 5 days before. Cheney, who knew the area, would drive. As the vanguard in the march to freedom, the men knew that trouble likely lay ahead. Their ground rules were unambiguous. Stick to the main roads, cooperate with authorities, and never travel at night. They planned to be back that afternoon. Schwerner told his staff to call the COFO office in Jackson if he didn't phone in by 4 p.m. He never made the call. When Mickey Schwerner failed to phone his office at the scheduled time, the FBI was notified. They in turn contacted local authorities to see if anyone had seen Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman.
What are you doing, Terry? Get my county like that.
Someone had.
Out of the car!
According to Neshoba County Deputy Cecil Price, the trio was returning from Longwood that afternoon when he pulled them over outside of Philadelphia, Mississippi, 38 miles from Meridian. They were brought to the county jail in Philadelphia. Cheney was booked on a speeding charge.
I need to make a phone call.
The others were held in connection with the burning of Mount Zion Church.
What do you know about that? Nothing, sir.
Cheney was locked in a cell designated for black prisoners. Schwerner and Goodman shared a different cell.
All you have to do is make sure that you're polite. Say yes sir, no sir.
They weren't allowed to make a phone call until dinner time, hours after their 4 o'clock call-in time had passed. According to another person sharing the cell, when the jailer's wife told Schwerner he could make a collect call, he declined. No one knows why. Eventually, after Schwerner paid Cheney's $20 bond, Deputy Price released the men. By then, it was 10:30 p.m.
I don't want to come back to Philadelphia again.
What happened next was anyone's guess.
As long as they were missing, you had some hope. If they had turned up in jail and they were still in jail, then you had some hope. The issue was the release at a certain time of night from the jail, and then they're missing again. So that circumstance means the worst.
Agent Sullivan, too, feared the worst. He suspected that the civil rights workers weren't simply released, but more likely handed over to the Klan.
This was a type of crime that I was familiar with. The lockup and then give away the prisoners instead of releasing them. I was familiar with this sort of thing. I was quite sure that this was what was in progress.
The disappearance was chilling news to the student volunteers scheduled to arrive in Mississippi the next day. But people throughout the state had a different read on it.
The Mississippi response, it was, this is a hoax, and these people have really staged this to get national attention, and, they're up hiding someplace in New York or some other place, right? And this is just all a big publicity stunt. That was the official Mississippi response.
There were widespread rumors, and we were told, I think it appeared in the papers too, that these people had set up a scam here and then vanished to Cuba, where they would leave the state of Mississippi embarrassed by what had happened to them.
The investigation began with Deputy Price, the last person to have seen Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. He stuck with his story of releasing them around 10:30 p.m., but he couldn't account for his own whereabouts for about an hour afterward. For Joe Sullivan, dispatched from Memphis to lead the investigation, it was the only clue, and not much of one.
All I know is they got in their car and they headed out of town, just like we told them to.
The sheriff's office was a participant. That I was sure. I didn't have any proof. All I had was a history of having seen this sort of thing before.
Well, we pulled them over
and
we brought them in here.
at that point, I became more selective about who we were telling, what we were doing.
The FBI began a search for any signs of the young men. No one had seen them, or at least they weren't saying so. Then, on June 23rd, 2 days after their disappearance, their station wagon was found. 2 Choctaw Indians from a nearby reservation had come across the smoldering vehicle the following evening. It had been burned to the metal in a swampy area called Bogachita Creek, 50 feet from the highway near Philadelphia. When they learned of its possible significance, they called the FBI. Special Agent Jay Cochran was dispatched from Washington. An expert in firearms and explosives, he'd seen more than his share of civil rights violence. When he arrived at the scene, he wasn't optimistic about what the car would reveal.
In examining the burned out vehicle, we were looking for any evidence of human remains. We were also looking then for any evidence that may have been left behind of any value in determining what happened to the civil rights workers.
The car was too far gone to provide any clues. But nearby, investigators found something more promising. A watch later identified as belonging to Schwerner, and keys to the car. The watch had stopped at 12:45. It took no time at all for the news of the discovery to spread.
The vehicle hadn't been recovered very long before the news was out on the police wires and the press wires and the neighbors' wires and the radio and so on. And we started to run a stadium at Bogchito, and that wasn't easy.
For those so inclined, the discovery of the car only supported the idea of a hoax. But unofficially, investigators' hopes of finding the men alive had faded.
It was obvious from the beginning that we weren't leaving until the bodies were located. Mr. Hoover wouldn't have countenanced that, and for that matter, neither would the general public. We were going to find those bodies if it took forever.
Agent Sullivan contacted Director J. Edgar Hoover to ask for reinforcements.
I told him that I thought I would need at least 25 men in short order, but I thought I would need more pretty promptly if it developed the way I was afraid it would. And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to need 100 men." And he said, "There are 100 men coming."
They're real good guys, all right?
Soon, 100 agents, aided by student volunteers, descended on Philadelphia to search for Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman.
Help you guys come with me and start checking the bushes over here.
It wasn't enough. The men or their bodies could have been anywhere. Against the backdrop of this agonizing mystery, student volunteers stormed the bastions of the Old South, trying to register black voters. Dixie fought back with all it had. As the summer invasion pressed forward, the eyes of the world focused on Mississippi. In Neshoba County, Deputy Price and Sheriff Lawrence Rainey rebuffed the press. They felt the disappearance of the 3 civil rights workers didn't merit the attention it was receiving. And still the search continued. "400 sailors from Meridian Naval Air Station were pressed into duty, working in rotating shifts. Woods were scoured, rivers were dragged. Then the FBI received word that a body of a black man had been pulled from the Mississippi River near Vicksburg. They went to investigate. Though Vicksburg was 140 miles away, it was possible that Cheney's body may have floated downriver. It was the only lead in an otherwise dismal search.
We discovered that that this body was not that of one of the missing civil rights workers. It was determined that he was the victim of a Klan lynching.
It wouldn't be the only false alarm that summer as other lynching victims surfaced. Some had gone unreported, because in some areas, the Klan was the law. Finding the missing civil rights workers was the FBI's first priority, but busting the Klan was the ultimate goal. As the drive for voter registration continued, the hot Mississippi air crackled with hatred. Klan activity intensified. More than 60 black homes, churches, and businesses burned that summer, and that was just the beginning.
I saw the violence, I saw the killing, I saw the people left homeless by fires, I saw churches burned in the middle of the night, I saw lives being lost for no reason whatsoever, by a group that felt they were right.
To break the Klan's hold on the South, President Johnson authorized a new FBI office opened in Jackson, Mississippi, 3 weeks after the men disappeared. According to Agent Ingram, the days of subtlety were done. The FBI was taking off its gloves.
In a matter of a few months, you had almost 300 agents working up and down. From this state runs about 400 miles from the coast up to the border of Tennessee, so we covered every facet of it. 82 counties, we had agents all over the place.
While some agents continued to beat the bushes, others knocked on doors, hoping to find some leads. People were polite, but uncooperative.
White boys and a black boy. Have you seen anybody?
The FBI's tactic was to divide and conquer.
Okay, thank you very much.
Agents would attend Klan rallies, take photographs, copy down license plates until they were asked to leave. By then, they had what they had come for.
Then, the next time we talked with them, they say, I'm not a member of Klan. Well, you were at this Klan meeting. Why were you there? If you're not a member, you're a sympathizer. Do you know these people blew up a church? Do you know these people blew up a school that was trying to desegregate? Is this the way you want to operate? And most would say no. So we found that being at some of the meetings was a deterrent for some. Some would stop coming because they didn't want us to visit them.
Others required more persuasion. Agents were assigned individual Klan members to watch over from a distance. If a bombing or other act of violence occurred, it was the agent's duty to call that Klansman to account for his whereabouts.
Before long, you know, they did not like being summoned out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning when a crime was committed 4 counties away, but after a while the wives said, hey, I don't want this anymore. My kids do not want it. And so before long you could talk with them and they understood where you were coming from. You got to know each other on a first name basis.
Soon informants started coming forward. Some were housewives with stories to tell. Others were Klan members haunted by conscience who could provide some small piece of information away from the curious eyes of their neighbors. To provide additional incentive, civil rights and religious organizations came up with money to pay informants. The veil of silence began to lift. Some informants hinted that the investigation should begin at the sheriff's office, though Sullivan had already had his eye on Sheriff Rainey and Deputy Price.
Deputy Sheriff Price was a key target in our thinking, as was Rainey, because Price didn't do very much without Rainey's authority. Our problem was to document what he had done, to find somebody who would tell us about it.
An informant suggested talking with a young man named Wilmer Fay Jones. Agents located 19-year-old Jones living in Chicago. He had suddenly moved out of Philadelphia almost 3 weeks before the men disappeared. It wasn't by choice.
I was told in town that this is the place.
He told agents that his troubles began on June 1st when he went to a store in Philadelphia to get his class ring resized.
You guys could fit that for me.
The woman behind the counter was reluctant, but took his ring to fix. Soon after, he was arrested by Sheriff Rainey and Deputy Price. They locked him up for supposedly asking the shop clerk out on a date. He wasn't allowed a phone call. When they finally released him just after midnight, a gang of men were waiting for him. They roughed him up and forced him into a truck.
Get in the car! Get in!
The vigilantes drove him to a secluded spot. They tried to force him into confessing that he had asked the clerk out.
Better tell us, boy. Tell us.
He swore his innocence. The gang was prepared to kill him on the spot. But then one of the men, who they called the preacher, spared his life. He told Jones to leave town for good or he was a dead man.
You understand me? You understand me? Get out of here. Go.
Jones was on the next bus out of town.
They roughed me up a little and they let me go.
The story Jones told sounded like a plausible M.O. for what could have happened to Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. Only perhaps they weren't lucky enough to have escaped with their lives.
But here now, we have some additional evidence about what happens to people who are in unlawful custody in jailhouses and are going to be disposed of in one way or another. So if it had happened once in Neshoba County, we were sure it could have happened again.
Believing that Jones may hold the key to the location of the civil rights workers' bodies, agents had him take them to the spot where the gang roughed him up. A search of the area turned up nothing. But there was one informant that Sullivan was keeping to himself, slowly cultivating, winning his confidence by degrees.
Your identity will never be revealed.
This informant spoke under terms of total anonymity. His identity is protected even to this day because his life may still be in danger. He's known only as Mr. X. If anyone still considered the disappearance of the 3 civil rights workers to be a hoax, their opinion would soon change.
They'll kill me if they were found out.
The FBI's star informant was about to emerge. On July 31st, 1964, Mr. X agreed to talk to Agent Sullivan.
After we finished our social chat, I said, "Are you going to be able to tell me anything significant tonight?" And he said, "I think I can tell you where the bodies are buried." And I said, "Tell me where."
Mr. X told Agent Sullivan that Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were buried in an earthen dam at a place called Old Jolly Farm, owned by the wealthiest man in the county, Olin Burridge. But agents couldn't go there at once. They knew their moves were being scrutinized by the Klan. They didn't want to make it obvious they'd been tipped off to the burial location. A search warrant was issued for Old Jolly Farm. Sullivan sent Agent Cochran and others to the dam site. When they arrived, they realized this was no job for probing rods and shovels. The earthen mound still under construction was 550 feet long, 20 feet high, and 10 feet across at the top. If the bodies were here, they weren't merely dropped into graves. Rather, the dam was built on top of them. Agents wanted to keep the excavation a secret. That would be difficult now. They needed an outside contractor with bulldozers and other heavy earth-moving equipment to extricate the bodies. According to Special Agent Jay Cochran, there were some concerns about the safety of the crew.
It was decided to utilize armed agents in a convoy of the heavy equipment from Jackson to the location where we would begin using the equipment.
On August 4th, the equipment was in place. The contractor was asked to advise them how best to clear away the earth layer by layer.
Cochran talked to him and said, "Can you give me an estimate as to what the construction cycle was on this dam? How it was built, how the dig was done, how the dam mound was shaped, and in what time sequence?"
He said, "Well, you must know what you're looking for," and I just didn't comment to him. At no time during these negotiations, had either the construction crew or in this case the foreman been told precisely what we were looking for, but I think they would have had to have been blithering idiots, and they weren't, to have not known what we were after.
After the foreman gave agents a crash course in dam building, Cochran poked his stick in the ground where he wanted the digging to begin. Then, in a move that has become a legend in the annals of the FBI, he had a change of heart.
Cochran then picked up a stick, and for reasons best known to his guardian angel, he walked 15 feet further and put the stick in the ground and said, "Dig here." And that's where they were.
The job, beginning at 8:30 in the morning, progressed slowly. By 2:45, the pit was 13 feet deep, and the pungent smell of death was unmistakable. The machines were moved aside in favor of more delicate garden trowels. As the sun beat down, the odor rose up and poisoned the air. Flies swarmed, ushering in the agent's grim success. Just after 3 p.m. at 14 feet, the first body was found. It was Mickey Schwerner, identified by the contents of his wallet. Goodman was uncovered next, followed by Cheney.
It's very hard to describe. You know, it's perhaps the saddest experience that one can have. It's a graphic illustration of man's inhumanity to man. You know, that simply kill these people for no earthly reason, no earthly good reason.
The bodies had been buried more than a month, so it was impossible to immediately determine the cause of death. The coroner was summoned, and with him came Deputy Cecil Price.
I just walked up like it was the sheriff's business. Found a body, how about that? It was pretty casual, really.
Price and the coroner lifted the bodies from the pit so they could be moved to the state hospital in Jackson for autopsy.
Cecil Price helped to load all of them. I didn't help to load any of them. I was letting the local authorities who had jurisdiction over the murders do their thing. So we couldn't be accused of confusing or messing up the evidence or anything of that sort.
If the deputy's presence was an example of the criminal returning to the scene of the crime, Agent Cochran saw no sign of guilt.
Every agent that was at the scene, eyes were fixed on Price when he was there. And I noticed not the slightest emotional reaction. And I don't think anybody else did either.
The bodies were autopsied in Jackson. All 3 men had been shot. Schwerner and Goodman were each shot once, Cheney 3 times. A hard, rock-like substance was pried from Goodman's right hand. Whatever happened that night, the substance showed that Goodman's nightmare didn't end with a bullet.
Upon subsequent examination of that substance at the FBI laboratory, it was determined to be clay, similar in makeup or consistent with the clay compositions of soil at the dam site. This would tend to suggest that at the time Mr. Goodman was laid in his grave, that he was still alive.
The bullets from the victims were analyzed at the FBI's Firearms Toolmarks Unit. Most of the more than 5,000 weapons here were confiscated over the years from actual crimes. Though its equipment has changed since 1964, the role of the unit remains the same: to match bullets to weapons. To Today, the shooting gallery is the domain of Supervisory Special Agent Paul Tangren.
The bullet will pass over defects within the barrel, and those are defects that are specific and unique to that firearm. And that pattern of marks it picks up passing over these defects is like a fingerprint for that gun.
Bullets from a crime are scrutinized side by side. If they were shot from the same gun, the comparison microscope would form a seamless image of the marks on both bullets. Bullets shot from different weapons simply wouldn't match up.
I've got lots of marks and very little agreement, and that is typical of what you would see of two bullets fired from two different guns of the same type.
Using similar techniques, the FBI determined that Cheney was shot with two different .38 caliber weapons. Residue showed that the men were shot at close range. Total cost of the bullets used to kill 3 men, about 25 cents. Suddenly, to the people of Neshoba County, the missing civil rights activists was no longer a hoax or publicity stunt. This was the turning point. Racists drew the line at murdering white people. According to Agent Jim Ingram, the FBI no longer seemed like the bad guy.
Then they realized we're dealing with some very violent people. So the mood changed to our betterment, because we had people that wanted to assist us. Particularly the little town of Philadelphia, Mississippi. It was amazing how many people then said, look, if we have these people among us that would kill, then we need those individuals found and arrested and prosecuted.
I do want to help you.
Meridian Police Sergeant Wallace Miller was one respected Klan member who had seen enough. He wanted out of the Klan, but the FBI convinced him to stay. Now, the FBI had their mole, and the impenetrable walls of the invisible empire had been breached.
And the color must be driven out of our hearts, and we have to look to the cross. Let it be done. Amen. The next few weeks.
Sergeant Miller proved that he wasn't involved in the murder of the civil rights workers. He helped the FBI by gleaning information about the crime from fellow Klansmen. Others were also coming forward. Nobody knew that anyone else was talking. The information started to flow. From interviews with various informants, the FBI compiled a list of names of Klansmen who may have been involved. The same names kept coming up. Agents learned that the murders were the plan of Sam Bowers, the first Imperial Wizard, or head of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan of Mississippi. His right-hand man was Edgar Killen, known as the Preacher, because he was one. He was also apparently the same preacher that spared the life of Wilmer Fay Jones.
So we had informants that could give us direct information. We had individuals who actually were involved in the shooting that gave us signed confessions.
Confession led to confession. Slowly, a picture of the events that night took shape.
Going down in Louisiana.
Sir, I need to make a phone call.
It was a plan of horrible simplicity. While Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney were in jail, Deputy Price notified Preacher Killen, who rounded up fellow Klansmen. The Klansmen gassed up their cars, loaded their weapons, and waited until the men were released so they could carry out their Imperial Wizard's orders. When the civil rights workers were released at 10:30, the Klan was ready.
Let's head back to Meridian. How'd they treat you? Okay, but I didn't like it there. Yeah, spooks. Hey, you got the keys? You just drive. I don't want to come back to Philadelphia again. Let's get out of here.
Not far out of Philadelphia, they must have noticed lights in their rearview mirror, closing at a fast clip. They sped up to try to outrun them, topping 100 miles per hour. One pursuer's car broke down, but two persisted. Deputy Price's cruiser was one of them. He hit the flashers. Cheney pulled over.
Matter with you, boy?
Deputy Price yanked Cheney from the station wagon.
Out of the car! You shut up, boy! You were doing over 100 miles an hour in my county, boy. Don't make me chase you like that. You see them lights?
Schwerner and Goodman were escorted into the back of the patrol car.
Get out of there! Whoa!
As Cheney started to follow them, Price clubbed him with his blackjack and shoved him into his car.
Get off, boy!
The procession continued down Highway 19, one of the Klansmen driving the station wagon. The murders occurred without fanfare. Schwerner was the first to die. The car stopped on a dirt road. Schwerner was pulled out of the car, spun around, and shot point blank. Goodman was shot in much the same manner. They saved Cheney for last, shot by two men. The bodies were loaded into their station wagon. They were driven to Old Jolly Farm, where the bulldozer operator waited in the darkness, ready to conceal the evidence under 14 feet of clay. Last, the station wagon was driven to the swamp. Gas was poured over it. A match was struck. On November 25th, the FBI announced it knew who killed the civil rights workers. But murder charges fall under state jurisdiction, not federal. The best the FBI could hope to do was to convict on civil rights violations. They knew that Mississippi would be unlikely to file murder charges. More than 5 months after the murders, 19 men were charged with felony conspiracy to oppress and intimidate the civil rights workers from practicing their constitutional rights. 2 more were charged with having knowledge of the crime. All made bail and were released. A pretrial hearing was set for December 10th.
When you realize the scope of the physical evidence that we were able to capture, the pictures of the dam, the pictures of the bodies, the post-mortems, the burned vehicle, on and on, we just had enormous amounts of physical evidence, circumstantial evidence to document the confessions. So it was a powerful case that we turned over, and we were blessed because we had 2 outstanding prosecutors.
The evidence was, we thought, insurmountable, but we also knew that there were troubled times in Mississippi, that not everyone thought like we did.
The federal government's prosecution went wrong almost from the start. At the hearing, the judge refused to allow signed confessions or written testimony from key witnesses. The government pressed the matter, And on January 11th, a grand jury indicted 18 men, including Sheriff Rainey and Deputy Price. But the charges were knocked down from felony to misdemeanor. The case languished until 1966, when the United States Supreme Court ruled that the felony charges were applicable. Three years after the murders, on October 9, 1967, the trial was held at the federal courthouse in Meridian. For 10 days, the nation awaited the verdict. But none came. The jury was deadlocked.
And immediately, the people there within the courtroom in Meridian, Mississippi, they burst into laughter and joyful hugging each other, saying, "Hey, we've won. It's a hung jury." Well, the judge said, "No, you're going to go back."
And back they went to deliberate further. That next morning, October 20th, 1967, they reached a verdict. Of the 18 men charged, 8 were ultimately found guilty of civil rights violations, including Imperial Wizard Sam Bowers and Deputy Cecil Price. It took more than 3 years for justice to be served, and even then, it was delivered only in half measures. Bowers received the stiffest sentence, just 10 years. Cecil Price received 6. Sheriff Rainey and the preacher were acquitted. None of the men indicted was ever tried by the state for murder. Many of them still live in Mississippi, and though there's talk of reopening the Myburn files, all evidence in the case was destroyed years ago by court order. The hatred that split the nation was not so easily eradicated. According to civil rights activist Bob Moses, what happened in Mississippi marked the beginning of the great changes to come.
What has changed in Mississippi is that before the 60s, Mississippi held itself as a state apart from the rest of the country, a place which was going to defy the country at any odds to maintain what was its racial apartheid. And now it's indistinguishable from the rest of the country. So Mississippi has become like every other state in the country.
Donations helped to rebuild Mount Zion Church. It has become a shrine to the 3 men who came here hoping to make a difference, and who succeeded in ways they could never have anticipated. Nicky Schwerner and Andrew Goodman were buried in New York. James Chaney's grave is in the hills outside of Meridian, where it bears the scars of vandals.